Hello, everyone, and welcome to episode number 101 of the Avocado Gamescast. I'm here with the Kappa,
Hey,
and on our last episode, we just passed the 100 episode mark.
yeah, feels like a new era almost, right?
Yeah, it feels like we're renewing the podcast and we're
Yeah,
starting from scratch again. Just like the first episode, where for most of it was just us, and Bear Thief for part of it as well. So today we thought we'd record something a little bit lower key, chat about some of the news and some of the games we've been playing lately. We haven't been playing the news, we've just been playing the games. We've been reading and listening to the news. But first, before we get into all of that, we're going to chat about the Fallout TV series that recently debuted on Amazon Prime. In fact, I shouldn't call it a TV series. It's a streaming series. It's not a TV series. TV is a very specific thing. I've watched 3 episodes so far. Kappa, I said you finished it.
yep, finished it.
Yeah. So, what did you think?
I loved it. I mean, I've got a lot of mixed feelings about video game shows in general. I feel like there's kind of been like two different, like I guess schools of thought, right? The Last of Us and Halo, I think Last of Us was super faithful to the source, right? Like down to specific things. Almost felt like an adaptation at times, right?
Yeah.
Halo kind of went the opposite, right? Hey, we're not anywhere near faithful to what the games did, and a lot of people hated that, right? And then three, you've got Fallout, which I think mostly takes the vibes and then just ties into lore, right? So it's more dependent on the atmosphere of Fallout, which I think works, right?
Yeah, it's a new
For
story in the same world.
right, but like you start to pick up like, hey, there's a little bit of stuff kind of going on here, right? But all in all, like I think that I think it feels right as a viewer, as a longtime Fallout fan. You know, I really enjoyed it. And my measure of success for anything is always what did my wife think? As like a non-viewer, right? And she loved it as well. There's been two video game adaptations my wife has just like been over the moon with. This one
And the
and
Warcraft movie?
the Warcraft movie. I'm
Yeah,
glad you
I remember.
remember. She was like so into it, and this one had a little bit of that going on as well, where she was wanting to know a lot more about the world, Fallout. Why is it the 1950s, but not really 1950s? Timelines, what happened, things like that. And just sitting down and going over a lot of that with her, she was really interested in so much more than just what the show was kind of showing.
It
Um,
really does feel like it's just a small sliver of a broader franchise, but in
mhm.
not such a way that it's confusing to someone who doesn't have much familiarity with it.
Yeah, and
Like,
it does. It handles the flashbacks really well. I not just video game or Fallout or anything, but a lot of games kind of choke on those types of things, right? When you're doing a flashback and it's taking you out of the moment, and who's who, and what's this character, and why are they important? Those sorts of things. This one really handled that like almost perfectly, honestly. Um, but the highlights of the show really are the characters, and I think that's why a lot of people walked away with, well, and even initially kind of got those New Vegas vibes, because it's more about the story of three companions, well, four if you count dog meat, right? But the love that the people are showing seems to be more love towards like the character. The plot's great. It really nails. I think I want to say it's almost the same plot as three, a little bit twisted. I don't want to spoil too much.
yeah,
But it's got a lot of that like Fallout, like who your parents are is important. I don't think that's going to surprise anybody. The vault being this ideal, setting, but actually it's hiding. I think that's a very important thing in Fallout. Lore and life and stuff like that. And then the fact that the surface dwellers, they've gone through so many hardships. It's just like stacking bricks on top of a wall at this point for some of them. Um, Beautifully shot. Lots of money went into this show. Not
definitely
surprised it's
in
been
like the
renewed, but
production design, it's
oh yeah, I
really,
mean,
really fantastic.
there's a couple scenes that felt a little iffy. I think mostly in the pilot episode, but that's sorted out well into production. Where I'm guessing, I don't know how the production of this went, but it does kind of feel like there was like hey, we're gonna produce a pilot, see how it looks, see if we can make it happen. And things kind of shift after that first episode. You being on the second or third, I think you probably felt a little bit of that. Maybe not too much yet, but the scope of things really, really gets out there. Um,
Yeah, so far it's been pretty small scope in terms of what
yeah,
it's depicting. I find that I think the plot is intriguing so far. I'm interested to see
mhm,
where it goes. I know some people don't really like mystery box plots. I'm fine with this. I'm fine that there is a MacGuffin that whose purpose is going to be revealed later. I've also heard the complaint that the characters are thin, and I don't really agree with that. I think the characters have complex motivations that are well sketched.
and Fallout is a MacGuffin series. Every Fallout has a MacGuffin. I mean, just
Yeah,
straight up, right? Like
New
water pit
Vegas
is a
is
MacGuffin.
MacGuffin the
Yeah,
game, right?
yeah. Platinum chip. They might as well call it the platinum MacGuffin. I mean, it's so that part I think is faithful to the series in a good way. But also it's faithful in a way that like I do think that in the future these weird bits of things are going to be so much more important. That the MacGuffins are going to be aplenty. If you're trying to save lives, or go back to life how it was. Um, I think what's really telling about it too is how people are talking about it, where it's the kind of series where as soon as it ended, people had questions, but they wanted more, right?
Yeah.
And that is a different feeling than a lot of shows where it's like, okay, I got a lot of questions, and I hope they answer them, and if so, I'll get back to it. But I think that's one of the things where Amazon's probably gonna be like, okay, we got a hit on our hands because we ended this with a lot of questions. We started this with a lot of questions. Some were definitely answered, but people want more, and that is a very, very good place to be. I think if you're running a TV show in this like streaming era where um, people are going to want more of a lot of things, but then it's how many people watched it versus how many people want more versus what it cost, right? Um,
Yeah, like costs for TV, production costs for TV series go up every year. I think if it's enough of a hit that they're going to keep financing it for
mhm.
probably a couple more seasons. And if the quality is maintained, then I think it could go for, 4 or 5 seasons.
Yeah, I definitely could, and I think this is. I know a lot of people hate Todd Howard for various reasons, but this feels like his baby. I mean, this really does. I mean, not just
I mean, the
TPing on
reasons
it,
to
but
hate Todd Howard are quite good at
right, right.
times.
But
But, like,
one of the things that was always leveled at him that I at least this one thing I did not buy was that he doesn't care about the series. I think he loves Fallout. I don't
oh
think
no, he
this
absolutely
is.
loves Fallout. I
Yeah,
think he can be a bit hacky, but he
right,
definitely
right.
loves Fallout.
Yeah, well, which is a good fit because even I watched some interviews from like Tim Kaine and a few other people, and they'll even admit that like when Fallout kind of came out, there was some ideas in there that were like new and revolutionary and stuff like that, but it was also like we want people to be relate this back to actual other things in literature, and I think that's smart to tie some of that into because otherwise it feels like its own world in some bad ways, like it doesn't feel realistic. But yeah, I loved it start to finish. I can't wait to see where everybody goes on it. I think there's a reason we've had a pin thread on the site now for a couple weeks, and nobody's like, and there's still new comments coming in. Usually, that's kind of my own personal like avocado way of seeing how popular the show is like how long is the pin thread still getting talked?
I
Because a
think
lot
it'll
of
continue to get talked for a while. Like,
yeah,
people work through these things at their own pace.
yeah,
I'm only 3 episodes in. I'll probably finish it late next week at some point, and I'll definitely have thoughts on it. So far, I'm pretty positive on it. I like. I have a lot of complaints, but like the number of complaints I have is out of step with how much I'm actually enjoying it because I am enjoying it quite a bit.
right,
So I do want to make that very clear. I like this a lot, but I'm also going to list a lot of like gripes with I think
yeah,
how it's handling things. But the one thing that I really want to say off the top, in terms of what it handles really, really well, I think the the aesthetic that it captures
yeah, the
is
atmosphere,
very,
yeah,
very Fallout.
yeah,
And like, I think sometimes you can get this kind of impression from the way people talk about video game adaptations or adaptations of comics or things like that, where people disdainfully say, "Oh, there's too much slavish devotion to the aesthetics or the trappings of the comics, and you know,
Watchmen, right?
nerds, yeah, nerds need to
Yeah.
get over themselves, right? And I've always found that a little bit. It's not just like, condescend to fans, whatever. Fans can be dicks, but I've always found it a little bit dismissive of the original source material and the art. Like, it's not sacred material, but
Yeah.
everything that went into it is well considered, right? Like, Fallout uses very specific color scheme for a reason, because it evokes very specific art style from the 1950s, like that beginning of Googie architecture and all the color schemes associated with that. Like, there's a reason it uses that color scheme. There's a reason it uses like the shapes of appliances that it uses. There's a reason, like, it has a very specific
Cars
type
look
of
like, yeah, they're future but past. Yeah.
right. It's the
Um,
reason it's doing that kind of retro future thing. Like, it's not exactly 1950s. It's
mhm.
taking some of those elements and playing with them to make it like an alternate version of the 50s, right? All that stuff is there for a reason, and it evokes very specific things. And if you were to go in and change all that stuff, you'd be changing the meaning of Fallout. You'd be changing the
Right.
vibes, you'd be changing the tone, you'd be changing what it's referencing. And so I think they very smartly took all that stuff from the Fallout games and put it in the show in a way that respected the source material and in a way that showed that it understood why all that stuff was in the source material. I'm
Right.
not saying you should never change stuff from the source material. Like, if you have a reason to do it, it's a good reason, go ahead and do it. But they didn't have a good reason to do it here, and they didn't do it. So I think the approach there was
So
really good.
that's such a good point, because that's one of my big contrasts to this, between this and Halo. I'm going to keep bringing it up only because I feel like Halo kind of got the exact opposite. Now, Halo got way better in second season, right? But it almost had the exact opposite problem of Fallout in some weird ways, right? Where it was like, hey, we're going to try to run with the vibe and the feeling of Halo and, the characters, but we're going to tell kind of a different story with different people. It's not going to be faithful, right? And it's not. But that kind of puts you in another spot where it's like, well, if you're not going to be faithful, you're going to alienate a lot of the people who were there to get you there, right? Um,
Right. And
but
it felt like the story they were telling just wasn't worth the changes.
right,
Like, if they
exactly.
told a new, fantastic, compelling story that retcon stuff from the Halo games, you'd probably have some nerds being like, "This isn't my Halo," but you would have a lot of people being like, "Okay, I see what they're going for." Um, Here, they just changed stuff basically for no reason, just because they could, and,
Right.
and
And I
that's
think
what caused the controversy.
what is stronger about Fallout has a stronger aesthetic to me than Halo. And trust me, I'm as big a fan of a Halo guy as you can be, right? But I
Oh,
think
I
that
like Halo more than I like Fallout, like, as a
oh,
franchise.
I just mean aesthetic.
Yeah, but
Like
the aesthetically, yeah, absolutely.
yeah, like I feel like I could show you, like, if I'm not showing you Master Chief, I'm just showing you like some random building in a Halo world. I'm like, what's this from? And you're gonna name five, six, different, sci-fi, properties probably at first.
Yeah, unless
Whereas
like the literal Halo ring, I'm not gonna recognize it.
right. Whereas if I show you almost anything from Fallout, you're gonna be like, yeah, Fallout. It's just a stronger, hits you right up front type, with it, and that's a cool place to be. I think if you're Fallout, where you just have to get it recognizable. I mean, even down to like the Raiders look recognizable in this. Um, Overall, though, I mean, I think really, really, really strong um, first season, and it doesn't surprise me that it's like people are like going right out to like, okay, um, let's start getting some more to this,
Yeah,
um, and the good sign, the good part of it all too, is that Amazon didn't fuck around. They didn't screw anything up. They were like, "Yep, here you go. Your second season is coming." So
yeah. I'm guessing that means the viewership numbers are pretty high, because otherwise you don't generally get those really fast renewal announcements. So the buzz must be good. They're probably getting great viewership numbers, and also probably great international viewership numbers. One of the things that we sometimes forget about video game adaptations, like, we're always asking, why adapt this? Is it really going to be that popular? We forget that video games have such an international audience now. That
mhm.
this is probably finding audiences all around the world, in Europe and Asia and Latin America, everywhere. And you can see it, just like, there are 5 minutes at the end of the credits for all the languages they've
Yeah,
translated the
yeah,
show into. like
It just goes. Yeah, I know exactly what you mean.
everything from Arabic to Telugu. It's
Yeah.
pretty fantastic that they've taken the time to do all that. In terms of things that I think this show doesn't do super well, the one big gripe I have about this show is that I really do not like how it's edited.
Mm.
I find a lot of scenes that should have more room to breathe, particularly expository scenes, it feels like they've got the message that people don't like exposition. Let's just run through it. So they run through those scenes pretty fast, and then you have these long dead audio visual segments that are wordless, that are just kind of concentrating on shots of the desert or shots of people looking contemplative. There's not a lot of substance to those scenes, and sometimes those run on a little too long. Or you'll get a lot of scenes where you'll have these where there'll be montages set to music, not exactly montages, but you'll have wordless scenes set to like the soundtrack, and sometimes it's just just put a few lines of dialogue there. You don't need the really obvious soundtrack in the background or the ironic soundtrack in the background. Have a little bit of more faith in the material. That's really my big gripe with the show. I think it really does suffer from some overzealous editing, and editing that really calls attention to itself. And a few problems with color grading, the nighttime scenes are basically visually illegible. The daytime scenes look fantastic. They
Yeah.
really did
There's
a
not a
great
lot of
lighting job.
yeah. It's kind of like 50-50. I know exactly what you're talking about. There is a couple times where it kind of looks really washed out almost, and then but I think you're going to start to see less and less of that as you go on. I think a lot of the money shows more in the back end,
Okay, yeah.
honestly. And so I'm I don't know. Like I said, I don't know about the production for this. I don't know how it went, but I did notice personally a big uptick in quality as it went on. So I don't know if that meant that hey, figure out if this thing's even going to work. Make a couple episodes of it. That later on got kind of changed up, but I definitely felt more in the back end that there was a lot more to a lot more to the world, especially, but also the technical aspects of it that you're going to notice as well.
That's good to know. For what I can tell, all the filming kind of took place in one go, from what I can see. They filmed in New Jersey, New York, and Utah in 2022, and then they did additional filming in Namibia. So
Yeah,
yeah,
it gets better, is what I'd say. It definitely kind of the money. I don't know whether it's they got a couple of different people who had a better way to do it or something, but it looks way better as you go. So yeah, I really liked where the whole show went by the end of the third episode, kind of where you are at right now. I was on board. So I guess give it some time, but I think you're going to be pleasantly surprised with it as a series, honestly.
yeah, I'm definitely eager to watch more. And even if it comes out that I don't think I'm going to end up hating this show. I think
Yeah.
I'll end up feeling pretty positive towards it in the end. I don't know if all my gripes will be addressed, but I like it enough to keep watching, which is more than I can say for some of the other shows that I've attempted to watch. So, what this I shouldn't say resurgence, what the debut of the Fallout series has done is it's renewed a lot of interest in the franchise. And so, on Steam, Fallout 3, 4, and 76 have been hitting really high player counts. I believe
Hmm.
76 actually hit a concurrent record for player count recently, which is really interesting. And I'm saying this as someone whose only Fallout game they've played is New Vegas, and a few hours of 3. I played a little bit of 3 and I've beaten New Vegas. So I had no idea how well 4 was really received in the end. I know 76 was kind of a disaster, but I hear 76 is kind of good these days.
Yeah.
So I think you have better insight into this. Are people
Yeah.
going back for new content, or what are they going back for?
So there is a content patch coming for 4. That I did a little bit of research in because one of the things I was curious about was whether I need to lock it down, um, lock my game down because of mods. So there's always that issue with mods when it comes um, to Fallout or any Bethesda game, I should say, right?
Yeah.
So I was like, okay, well, if I'm gonna lose all my mods, I'm gonna be kind of annoyed. But it looks like they're actually kind of doing their best. It sounds like right now to avoid that happening, which is good news. But
Absolutely. Yeah.
the content it looks like it's going to have some technical stuff. It's going to have an enclave mission, and a lot of people are thinking it's going to tie somewhat into the show, which wouldn't be a terrible idea. But I guess kind of see what they actually do with it. Um, but overall, I think that there's going to be a real reset in the Fallout world because, you know, one of the weird things I think is everybody kind of focused in on Starfield, focused in on Elder Scrolls. It does kind of feel like a little bit of juice got missed from the Fallout world, right? Um,
Yeah.
so
I mean, Bethesda is just not capable of having three teams
right,
working on three different games. They would need to staff up a lot more. I mean, I personally think they should staff up a lot more and just put larger teams even on individual games.
right,
But like, I don't know. They're not. Obsidian's too busy to handle a new Fallout right now, and
yeah,
Exile's doing Clockwork Revolution. Like, if they were to go build another Fallout instead of just a mission for Fallout 4 or an update to Fallout 76, like who could even handle that right
yeah,
now?
yeah. It seems like they're kind of at their absolute max of what they can do, and those games are taking all their bandwidth right now is what I would guess. Now I have no clue, right?
Yeah.
Obviously, who knows what the but I
What's
want
Roundhouse up to? The Microsoft's Halifax studio.
man.
The
Microsoft is like a mystery to me. Like I forget that some of their studios even exist. You know what I mean? Like there's
yeah,
just like,
like
you know,
Roundhouse is one of the old Bethesda studios. It's what became of, I believe, what became of Human Head. I had to look that up. Yeah, they. I don't know what they're working on.
yeah, that's me and like every Microsoft basically. Like you hear like, oh hey, this studio's out there still doing this thing. Like, oh, I forgot they even existed. Um,
Yeah, Mojang still makes new things.
yeah,
Yes,
exactly.
right.
That's a good example. No, so I mean, I guess overall, my thing right now is let's see where Fallout goes, but it feels like there's a lot of like like juice back in the series right now. When you've got people like my wife, kind of like hey, you want to play Fallout New Vegas? And so like pretty much everybody else, I reinstalled New Vegas, got far enough into it where I remembered what I didn't like. Reinstalled 4, got some mods up and running. Same thing. I checked out 76 with my oldest, and both of us kind of bounced off of it pretty hard. Destiny being our live service game, we're not new to the whole live service world, right? But it does kind of feel like Fallout 76 kind of still, for all the good things about it, it still kind of gives you like half the game a little bit. Like the rest of it, you have to buy. Like, oh, hey, this camp is really cool. So you leave the vault, and it's like, wow, look at this. This looks really neat. This camp thing, and you start to wander around. You realize, like, oh, this is all shit that people paid real money for. And a lot of the stuff just kind of does feel like it's all bound into like some kind of, combination of earn it plus play it plus pay for it. Where if you haven't been playing the game for the past, what is it, 6-7 years now?
Yeah,
um like any game like this, like any MMO, like any, you're just going to be kind of like, okay, so if I want this, I've got to buy this. And neither one of us really kind of jumped right into it. It felt okay, but I think I was getting recommended something from, I don't know, some game online journalism, whatever, and it was saying something like, the game that shouldn't exist, Fallout 76. Like it flopped so hard, it should have never still been around. But like, I don't know. I kind of have like a different feeling about that. Like I do think that they stuck with it, and that was during a period where a lot of game companies were sticking with some of their more higher profile flops and stuff. So not exactly surprised that it turned it around, but it's good they stuck with it, I guess.
I mean, I would have guessed that that thing would have died a pretty rapid death
Hmm.
based on how it launched. So kudos on ZeniMax for sticking with the game
Yeah.
and turning it into something worth playing, because what was there at launch was dire.
Yeah, it was
and
bad.
deserved all the criticism in the world. But sometimes you can make lemonade out of lemons, so good on them for that.
Yes.
Speaking of lemons,
Uh-oh.
one story that has popped up in the news lately regards Prytania Media, which is the, I guess, conglomerate, you could say, of
Yeah.
distributed studios that was founded by Jeff and Annie Strain, husband and wife team in game development. Jeff Strain himself is pretty famous in game dev. Like he worked at Blizzard, and as a gameplay programmer, I believe. And then he went on to found ArenaNet of Guild Wars fame and Undead Labs of State of Decay fame. So he's been around. And after Undead Labs, he went on to found Prytania Media with his wife. And they had 4 studios, I believe, under them. Crop Circle Games, Possibility Space, Fang and Claw, and a studio, I believe it was called Day One. I'm not sure what it was called. I can't find the information anymore. That's a studio working on mobile games. And the reason I can't find the information anymore is
They
kind of at the
blasted it from the internet, basically.
yeah, it's like all that info has been blasted. So many of these websites are down now.
Yeah.
Like the Britannia Media site is like, I think it's down or it's like redirecting funny or something like that. So I can't even get the full list of studios that was under their umbrella. I'm going by prior knowledge and Games Media reports right now. In fact, I think the only website on that list that's still up is the website for Fang and Claw, which is still operating as far as I know. Crop Circle Games and Possibility Space, they're both dead. So most of the staff for Crop Circle was furloughed or laid off in February, and then that studio was finally shut down in late March, I think right at the tail end of GDC actually, which was a little bit weird. Like you go off to a game developer conference, and then on the last day of the conference, you find out you don't have a job anymore, and you're like, "Why am I even here?"
Like everything with this studio always felt a little weird, didn't it? Like a
Yeah,
lot of like it almost like
too
you would
good to be
expect.
true.
Yes, yeah. Like every time they'd come something out with something like, okay, wait. Now I actually loved Undead Labs, and another fun PAX story. I'm pretty sure I met when Jeff Strain was doing PAX. I'm pretty sure he was one of the guys working the booths. They had like they wore like lab coats that were all like torn up, like they'd been in like a zombie apocalypse, and they were kind of demoing State of Decay. This was before State of Decay had come out, and they had like a really cool vibe to it. Like you were sitting down, almost like in front of like a console playing it, but like on the ground level, like you were a kid, you know. And even then, like he had like he had like a showman personality, you know, like very like, oh, wait till you see this. This is so cool. This is gonna be so cool. And it
Like
helped.
more Sean Murray or more Randy Pitchford.
50-50.
Okay.
Dead center. Like he wasn't promising me the world and he wasn't doing magic tricks, but also like he wasn't, just boringly sitting there promising things either. So somewhere in between. But I really like he had a cool personality. I was like, oh man. And then like State of Decay kind of felt like the little game that could for a while. Got put under Microsoft in some form, obviously, and then kind of went from there. But that was my own like little recollection of the guy just meeting him at PAX. But the every time they would pop up in my news, I'd look at him and I'm like, wow, this always feels a little off. So it's glad that everybody else kind of agreed, and it does look like it was a little bit off.
Yeah.
Because the first thing I think everybody read was I guess his wife's
Statement.
letter, which was
Oh God, yeah. So before we get to that, like,
Mhm.
I think I know the kind of person you're talking about. With like when we talk about Jeff Strain, like there's people who do have good intentions, but they overpromise or they're overconfident in what they can provide you. Like I've had
Right.
bosses like that and ended up laid off. It's never fun, right? So, but they're sad to have to lay you off, but they probably should have been promising what they were promising you in the first place.
Right. And
And
the reason you're getting laid off is partially because of that. Like they had a good idea, but they didn't have a plan. So
yep, I've
yeah.
been there. There's a reason I'm no longer in academia. So, like, Possibility Space was the other studio that got shut down. They got shut down in mid-April, and we'll get to that in a little bit. But to get to Andy Strain's statement, whoo boy.
Yeah.
Normally I wouldn't say that there's ever an inappropriate time to reveal that you have a diagnosis of a serious disease. I would have said that as an objective statement.
Right. Yeah.
Up until now, I think this might be the first time I've seen someone inappropriately disclose a serious disease.
Yeah. And
oh dear.
Well, yeah. And I think part of it was somebody probably said like they probably had some kind of PR flax that were supposed to do this, and then they fired him. And then it was like, oh, that's okay. I can do this. And it's the first time you kind of see like, yeah, hey, there's a reason for PR to exist. One of my prior jobs, in my industry, I was a speechwriter. And let me tell you, everybody thought it was the most worthless job possible on the planet. And they had no problems telling me that, right? Like, oh, come on, how hard can it be to write speeches? This seems, and I point out, well,
you have to spend all your day thinking about how different audiences will react to those words.
And the thing was, I wrote for executives, and whatever they say is like basically like the company itself said it, and it lasts forever, So a lot of times you're trying to stop them from saying shit. It's like, you can't tell these people this because if you're wrong, like it's on company record that an officer of the company said this, and
like the SEC will be on your ass.
Yeah,
right?
lots and lots and lots of people are going to be really upset. So, but that's the kind of thing you lose when you decide, you know what, I can handle this. And this is what you get is that kind of weird, not quite like corporate speak, but just kind of like almost oversharing. It almost read like a Facebook post. It went on and on and on. It felt really odd. And then, I'm sure, there obviously are like very upsetting reasons, but I don't know if I'm a person who lost my job, that's comforting me. I think it actually makes me even a little bit angrier. But
I mean, she didn't talk about. It was all about her. It was
yeah.
not at all about the affected employees. And we've seen statements from other studios that have had to furlough or shut down employees, or furlough employees or shut down, and we've seen statements along the lines of, it didn't work out for this company, but these are really talented devs, and if you have positions for them, you should hire them. Consider this a recommendation for everyone that just got laid off. And that's, I think, the bare minimum you can do when you screw over people like this. So I'm not going to read out the statement in full, but I'm going to highlight a few things from it. It opens with her saying, I got a text this afternoon that Ethan Gotch of Kotaku is writing an article about the closure of Crop Circle Games, one of the 4 studios under my care as a former CEO and owner of Prytania Media. So it's opening with these games journalists are
they're
sniffing
us.
around and it's not great. And he's going to say I have multiple sclerosis, which violates my bodily autonomy somehow. Okay, we are two. I just want to say we are two men, two cisgendered men, commenting on a woman in the industry, and we do want you to take what we're about to say with a grain of salt. It seems like weaponized feminism. I have no other way of putting it.
It definitely felt like we were. It was creating a us versus them when us is not a CEO millionaire and them is a CEO millionaire. You're kind of using. I've seen this before where you're using the language of a group to basically make an appeal to them.
You're using the language of of progressivism, of feminism, of bodily autonomy, of caring about health, etc. All that language to essentially turn public opinion against the games journalists. And turning public opinion against games journalism, as we've seen from the controversy of the past couple of decades, is pretty easy. Unless you sound unhinged in your statement, in which case I think this created more support for Ethan Gotch than would have otherwise existed.
The other part of it is obviously like, yeah, you know who else probably had lots of these same kind of issues? The people that you laid off. Like you're just kind of glossing over them to talk about your own problems, but you're not really, at all analyzing, well, my own actions did this because I ran a studio into the ground. Very weird article that like now help me figure out the timeline of the Kotaku article
It's not
as
even
well.
out yet as of
Okay,
this recording.
because
So we have no idea what Gotcha's
would have even
reporting
been
on.
said. Yeah, right.
Like, just to provide some context, there was a past expose at Kotaku about Undead Labs,
Hmm.
and that was written by Ethan Gotch.
Right.
And so, if I'm Jeff Strain, I'm like, this fucking guy again, right?
Yeah.
And that article, to be fair, was not very critical of Jeff Strain. It was more like Jeff Strain kind of became an absentee leader while he was shopping around the studio or while he was trying to leave it in other people's hands and set up his other ventures. So he just came across as an absentee and a little bit neglectful, but he didn't really come across as negative
Yeah.
in that particular article. But preemptively, before around the same time that that article was published, Jeff Strain released a statement of his own on Medium, which kind of went through and like was really overly self-defensive of his own actions. And then the article came out, and we're like, okay, I guess Jeff Strain had nothing to worry about because he doesn't come across that badly in this article. But then I'm guessing after like that whole incident and Ethan Gotch having written that article, I would guess that people probably went to him with some information and then he started digging.
Yeah.
And I'm guessing he's digging around what seemed too good to be true, which is three AAA studios and one mobile game studio starting up all at once under the financing, led by two industry vets, financed by God knows who, working on God knows what projects, attracting some of the top tier talent in the industry, like the talent that everyone knows is Austin Walker, who used to work at Vice, at Waypoint, which is part of Vice, and is a big guy. I think he does Friends at the Table and a couple of other things in games media. They hired that guy and then a whole bunch of other like veterans of I think Naughty Dog and a couple of other studios. So you're assembling all this veteran talent. You're advertising yourself as a place for people of marginalized backgrounds to have an inclusive and positive work culture. You're running 4 studios at once, and they're working on 3 AAA games and 1 major mobile game. Where's all the money to finance this coming from?
Yeah. Yeah.
All at once too. Like it's not like it started with one AAA studio, which is, as we saw from the recent closure of, or not closure, recent extreme downsizing at Ascended Studios, which made Immortals of Avium, which flopped. Starting a new independent AAA studio in this day and age is difficult,
Yep.
let
Yep.
alone
Yep. Yep.
3 all at once,
And
plus
you're
another
always
studio.
you're so dependent on so many weird sources of funding that you didn't used to be. And
Yeah.
one flop is it for so many game makers now, right? You don't get that second chance. So, one of the things I was kind of thinking about is if they were worried about that article specifically, they were maybe in some type of like, funding period where they're trying to get money and they're like, oh, there's an article out here, and it maybe made some stuff dry up. And that
Yeah.
was part of the reason for kind of like that visceral, like, you know, reaction I think that maybe was out there. So like it felt a lot more personal, a lot more pointed than a lot of these other like, hey, like you were saying, these people are great, good luck, we would have liked things to work out, but they just didn't. This felt like this was something totally different, right? So
Yeah.
I
Speaking of personal and like being really nasty to employees,
mhm.
uh, possibility space is shut down. If anything, the statement was well, there was no public statement. There was just an
Right.
email to employees,
Yeah, employees just
and
found out they shut down. Yeah.
oh dear God, like in fact, Jeff Strain effectively blamed someone leaking private information to Kotaku, to Ethan Gotch of Kotaku for the closure. and said it's something to do with internal profit and loss discussions and confidential all company meetings. That information got disclosed to Ethan Gotch, and then if you take Jeff Strain at his word, he went and talked to the publisher once that information was disclosed. Publisher said they no longer have confidence in the game, whether that was because of the improper disclosure or whether that was because of some other circumstances. They stopped funding the project. And like, it's possible. Like, some people have expressed a lot of skepticism about this, and I think some skepticism is warranted. Like, you shouldn't take these people at their word. But I do want to say it's possible. Like, especially if something's kind of on the bubble, like it could be successful, may or may not be successful. You have like a, let's say, like, not a rosy outlook, not a negative outlook, kind of a medium outlook. And you find out that you can't trust your business partner anymore. That can really spike a business relationship, and that can end that relationship. It does happen. It's especially prominent in like the Japanese games industry. You do see these kinds of things happen there, where projects get shut down because of leaks, or they change drastically because of leaks. So it's not unheard of. That being said, even if like all this information came out, and even if Ethan Gotch is like the worst games journalist in the world, this would still be a crazy statement to write.
Yeah.
Right? Like, it's still inappropriate to throw reporters under the bus. It's still inappropriate to like not even acknowledge the hard work that your employees put in. I don't know. It's just so weird to me how this.
The whole way these I think we're learning a lot as these sort of like closures happen, right? And there's like the right way and the wrong way. Almost like it sucks to close down, but I definitely get the feeling that there's some that are a little bit more adult, or like experienced or professional about how they run these things, and it's like you can definitely feel like some of the other ones go the other way with it. Just, hey, best I can do is just tell you why this happened, and that's it. Not really like any like feeling behind it though. um I obviously would rather nobody closing down studios, but man, it is just like it feels like it's one every week now at this point. um
Yeah.
and I think long term there's going to be like okay, well, we're got letting talent kind of go everywhere. How do we consolidate it? And hopefully, jobs start coming back. But this kind of like expansion and contraction feels like it's just never ending. And when you put stuff out like this, it just feels like, well, kind of feels like you're on the on the list of studios that, or devs that aren't making it back after all this.
Oh, some of these people are definitely leaving the industry, and they're
Yeah.
going to end up like writing accounting software, which is valuable work. Don't get me wrong. It's just not probably what they got into the industry to end
Yeah,
up
not
doing.
what you dreamed to do. Yeah.
And like, the last point I wanted to make about this is, so in this email that got leaked to Nicole Carpenter of Polygon, Jeff Strain mentions Project Vonnegut, which through some other leaks or insider information is known to be a project in the works of Microsoft. So it's likely that Microsoft was the publisher for what Possibility Space was working on, which would be interesting.
Yeah. I feel like
That
more
the
and more Microsoft is worried about, for the good or the bad. I feel like they are very worried about the culture of some of these places. This is kind of like an NFL sporting like thing, but they always talk about the locker room, right? Like sometimes like
Yeah.
adding people or coaches or things like that. Hey, this guy's got a lot of talent, but he's in the locker room he's a mess, right? And I'm starting to think that Microsoft is maybe looking around a little bit and going, wow, we have a lot of messes right now. We have Blizzard that maybe kind of is, who knows where
they
they're
still
going.
need to clean that place up,
Yeah,
right?
we've got Infinity Ward. We've got the, so like kind of basically, okay, we're going to put it back together. What do we, maybe we've got some of these locker rooms that need to be cleaned up, right? And I'm wondering if this was one of their little like, hey, we're not going to give you money unless you can show to us you're going to turn this around. And here's all the things that we have concerns about. But
Yeah,
that was
I
my.
would say it was probably that's why I say it was probably a marginal project.
Mhm.
Like if it's going to make them a lot of money, they turn a blind eye. Let's be real.
Yeah.
But like for a marginal project, yeah, that's when you don't have confidence in the company culture. It is pretty easy to say, okay, maybe this project isn't worth it. It's the same reason why they're no longer working with Moon Studio, who made the two Ori games,
Mhm.
and Moon Studio's new game is being handled by Private Division, which is a 2K imprint. Sorry, Take Two imprint. Yeah, it's because Microsoft did not have confidence in Moon's company culture. And all of it came out that, yeah, the leadership at that studio was out of their freaking mind and kind of mistreated their staff.
Which sucks to hear, right? Like,
Yeah.
it's you you don't really ever know what's going on with these companies, but it really does hurt sometimes to see like, oh, this place I liked is really, trash or whatever. And yeah.
Yeah, my guess with possibility states in particular is maybe it wasn't an abusive work environment, but it does seem like based on what they're saying about internal profit and loss discussions, or what Jeff Strain is saying about them, I'm guessing something didn't look right in the money.
Hmm.
And they might have been kind of trying to smooth that over with Microsoft or work like, they're hitting milestones, but in ways that were like very vertical slicey and not like indicative of the actual state of the project. Like stuff like that might be what
Hmm.
would cause the rupture. But we'll find out more whenever Ethan Gotch publishes
Yeah,
his article.
I am definitely interested in seeing that. I think it's going to be interesting to see exactly what the pain points were that led to a lot of this, because that letter covered a lot, and it's hard to know like exactly what was and what wasn't. So I really want to see what happens there.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, the only complication is that Kotaku is supposed to concentrate almost entirely on
Yeah,
guides now,
I
based on
know.
the dictate from their corporate overlords.
It's just
So
one thing after another, isn't it?
who
I mean,
knows
it's
whether, yeah, Ethan Gotch is ever going to get to publish his article. I hope he does,
wow.
but we will see. Uh, One last news item that I want to touch on, and that has to do with some recent sales data figures that
Yeah.
look a little bit alarming. So, two very famous or very well renowned analysts in the games industry, Matt Piscatella of Circana and Daniel Ahmad, also known on Twitter as HugeX of Nico Partners, recently revealed some pretty interesting sales data. Piscatella, for his part, showed data demonstrating that the U.S. console market peaked in 2008
Yes.
in dollar sales.
Yeah.
And that's not adjusted for inflation, which is wild.
We've almost had two gens of them losing their shirt on it. And I think, well, like even a month ago, people were like, "Oh, this is it for Microsoft in the console market. Look at their numbers, right? Like the numbers came out, and I think everybody's numbers might be that bad. Um, I
Well,
don't.
the thing is, the numbers are still pretty. Like, it's not like right now is down that much from the
Yeah,
peak. It's just it has peaked even as the games industry around them has grown,
right, right.
and
And just the
so it's
consumer
like plateaued.
electronic, yeah, just the consumer electronic market is like, you know, 50 years ago, my mom wouldn't own a Roku or something, and now it's like, yeah, here you go. This makes a ton of sense for me to own this, right?
Yeah,
Um,
absolutely.
so I really, I don't know. I think that consoles are dead. PlayStation, Nintendo maybe can hang on. I just think they're kind of on their way out, right? And I think Microsoft has been getting ahead of the curve with this streaming stuff for so long now that Microsoft doesn't
Yeah,
care if consoles die.
I don't know if I fully agree with that. I don't think consoles are like dying out this gen or even next gen.
Hmm.
But what's clear is that they're definitely on the decline.
Hmm.
They're declining relatively slowly. But what's really the untold story here is that Zoomers and Gen Alpha are not playing consoles.
Nope.
They're
Nope.
playing games on their phones, on their tablets,
Yeah.
like, and they're playing like these live service games. They're playing their Genshins. They're playing their Call of Duty War Zones. and they're not really getting into these big budget single player experiences that are what consoles are what are used to sell consoles, right? So like you're not playing your Last of Us's, they're not playing your Starfields, and those are what move consoles. So
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, that's probably what's going on. And once Zoomers Gen Alpha and whatever follows Gen Alpha, once that generation kind of takes over and they become what dictates the gaming market, then the bottom is going to fall out.
Hmm.
So is it going to be this gen? No. Is it going to be next gen? Maybe,
Maybe.
probably
Yeah.
not. The gen after that, I don't think that gen exists.
I don't. 100% agree. I think it's a little. I would accelerate a little more. I think you've got maybe two more gens of consoles, and I just don't see them being around anymore.
Yeah.
That's my personal guess. I think that maybe you're not diving out of the console business now, but you're selling yourself as a service if you aren't, right? And it doesn't maybe have to look like Game Pass to everybody, right? But I would be very nervous if I was Nintendo. That's just what I'm going to say. Like Nintendo's got this lock, right? They really do right now on a lot of this stuff. But I really worry where that ends up going in a couple of generations because you can only make me rebuy Mario so many times, and if I don't know. I just feel really like it's going to be harder to convince people to buy a whole system to play games in the future.
I mean, it's possible that the Switch's like wild success is covering up some inherent weakness.
Hmm.
We'll have to see. Like, I'll be really interested to see what the Switch 2 sales figures are
Yeah,
and what Nintendo does next in their next
because
console cycle, because that's going to determine whether they can adapt or not.
yeah, I mean, think
Like,
about the Wii was insanely successful, right? Wii U didn't really offer enough or any reason for people to swap to a Wii U, so they just kept their Wii's, right? Now, if that repeats itself again with Switch 2, right? Like the people who own a Switch are going to say, well, if I can play these same things on it, I'm good. I don't necessarily need this, right? Um,
yeah, I mean, I've argued that like the Switch 2 needs to. I mean, I've argued that the Switch they're kind of screwed a little bit with the Switch 2 in that they haven't really inured their base towards just expecting iterative versions of what was there before. Like with PlayStation and Xbox, you expect the next one to just be like what was there before, and PlayStation kind of screwed that up when they did the PS3, and it wasn't
yeah,
that.
yeah,
I mean, Xbox kind of screwed themselves in the Xbox One, the next gen. So these things kind of go in cycles. But I think now they've both been chastised by those experiences and learned their lessons. With Nintendo, they do court a little bit of a different market.
right.
So it's possible that the Switch 2 just does fine, and that might be covering up some inherent weakness, like the bottom is going to fall out for the Switch 3 or whatever. Or it could be that there really is just a core of family-oriented consumers who are going to buy a box that plays games and can also be used as a handheld. I don't know what the reality is because, like, I don't have kids, so how am I to tell?
Yeah.
But we'll have to see.
Yeah.
I don't want to speculate kind of either way on Nintendo. Like, it's hard to know which way it's going to go. The other interesting figure comes from, like I mentioned earlier, Daniel Lamont of Nico Partners, who revealed that Final Fantasy VII Rebirth was estimated to be selling at half the rate of its predecessor, Final Fantasy VII Remake.
That is shocking. I mean, when I read that in there, I had to double check because that is a very like, are people like you? If you're in on a series, you're all in usually, right? Are there people who just got enough of a taste of it and was like, nope, I'm good. You know, I'm surprised, and I think that ties directly into the console sales. I think there are
Yeah.
plenty of people who said I'm good enough with the PS4, and never made that leap to PS5.
I mean, PS5 sold really well.
Mhm.
The main, like, it's among one of the fastest selling consoles of all time. I mean, they've had a lot of issues with supply, particularly in markets where Final Fantasy does well, like Japan. Actually, now Japan, Final Fantasy isn't doing as well as it used to. But historically, Final Fantasy has done really well in Japan, and they had severe supply issues in Japan with the PS5. To the And they've also done a few other things in the Japanese market. Like for the longest time in the Japanese market, the X and O buttons were switched from what they are in in this West to match like the Nintendo convention. And then they switched them to match the Western convention with the
That's
PS5.
interesting.
And Japanese players got pretty pissed because they were used to the old convention. It's actually not such a big deal for us here in North America because we're used to both, right? On Nintendo, we know how A and B are arranged, and then we go play our Xboxes. We know that A and B are arranged the other way, and then PlayStation here matches the Xbox configuration for X and O. So yeah, that was a an incident that really pissed off Japanese gamers. And so they're doing worse in the market where they traditionally do really well. And the Switch is kind of eating their lunch in Japan right now. So they're not doing so well selling there. But this is across the board worldwide. Like Rebirth isn't even doing that well in North America where PS5 sold like hotcakes. So yeah, it's really strange that it's doing that poorly. And it's something that had a lot of money poured into it. Like Square Enix, we know, has this habit of saying that anything from one of its Western studios, like anything they publish from one of them, up until they sold everything to Embracer, and God knows what's going on over there these days. Like if it sold 3 million copies, that was a flop. And then something that took 8 times the budget to come out of one of their Japanese studios and sold 1.5 million copies, they're like, A-okay.
Yeah.
And so like, I don't know, like if Just Cause only sells 2 million copies and that's a flop, I don't know what you do at that stage. Like,
It's funny because this is one of the exact same thing I was talking about in in regards to movies, but it's so true to games as well, right? You get to a place where are the projections just so crazy these days that marginal successes are considered flops, right? Um, I was looking very specifically, right? This is not a game, right? Um, but you know the movie Can't Hardly Wait? Have you ever heard of that, or do you know what it was?
I've heard of the movie. I don't know anything about it.
1998 teen rom com, right? Like, kind of
That
like
does sound like a rom com name.
Ethan Embry and like Seth Green and Jennifer Love Hewitt. Kind of like that, like the graduation party. Everything's gonna go crazy. We're all gonna go to college, college, all that kind of stuff, right? Popular among kids, kind of like a cult classic. Everybody kind of liked it. You're a 6 out of 10 type movie, right? That movie made, like let's say like 12 million, right? Which isn't bad, but it's still making money, right? It's not a flop, right? And then like going back, like people, you know, total domestic on it, I think was like double its production budget. That's a gigantic hit, right? Because it cost 10 million to make and you made 25, but
Yeah.
you're doubling your budget, but you're only making 15 million, right? But those types of movies used to
Total
get made.
domestic gross was 25. This you just the U.S. gross.
Right.
25,605,000 dollars. $605,015.
So that's not bad, right? To double
Yeah.
what you cost to make, right? But these days it's like it's still a flop because it only made 15 million. So we're going to make 100 million movie that we want to make 200 million. You see what I mean? Like that's kind of what I feel like a lot of these movies are doing. Like you were hearing about these high profile Black Adam level Morbius and Madame Web flops where it's like we want that could have been a $10 million movie, but we made it $100 million movie. So now it's got to double the 100 million, not double the 10 million. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and like nowadays, I think like especially production companies and studios and publishers are starting to think more in terms of opportunity costs. Like, yes, we might have made 25 million gross on a 13 million budget, which is still 12 million in profit for Can't Hardly Wait. And that's not even counting foreign ticket sales. But what if we'd made a different movie for, let's say, 15 million that went on to gross like 100 million
Yeah.
box office
Yeah.
domestically?
What if we would have, fallen face first into the new Avengers and made 1 billion, But
Yeah, but like that's assuming that we're living in a world where everything can be the new Avengers.
right.
And these people are like, if these people think that like everything could in theory be in Avengers, if they're not making Avengers level hits, then they're failing. Then they're out of their freaking mind.
Right,
Because
exactly.
people don't want to watch 8 Avengers a year. They want that one big movie event, and then they'll watch some other movies here and there. Like you still need date
Right.
movies,
But
right?
you know where that's more true than anywhere is in video games, right? It's the exact same. It's all that magnified, right? We could have been making, because think about all these weird video game hits that come along that make trillions, not make so much money people can't believe that. Among Us, that simple ass idea would capture the country for 6 months. You know, what I mean, it was making money.
Not just the country, the world.
Yeah,
Right?
and making money just hand over fist. So you're saying, well, there's an indie game studio who made this, and they made tons of money on almost nothing. How come you guys can't do that, right? It almost becomes like what you're saying, the opportunity cost magnified, right? Because they're not making as much as they could be, but also when you have a game that almost every time I've heard of a game sales from, like, let's say, like, going back to the Tomb Raider reboot, right? Any of those like era games, you started to hear like, wow, this game didn't make as much money as we thought it would, and it also made $20 million. You're like, what? Like, what are you talking about? How much did you think it was going to make, right? I think one of our
Like,
first podcasts.
You start thinking like, hey, did you be able to pay everyone's salary? Did you make a profit?
Yeah.
Why are you complaining?
Yeah. Yeah. And it's like, well, we didn't make as much as projected. Well, then screw your projections. Your projections were wrong. It doesn't mean that the game was a flop because this started with like Hitman, right? Was Hitman the first one?
So it was a bunch of games that Square Enix had published in the West all at once. So it was, I believe, Hitman, Tomb Raider, and Sleeping Dogs all did worse than projected.
Right. But then
I believe it was Hitman Absolution around that time.
But then you look at like what they actually did, and they were all marginal to large successes, right?
Yeah, especially like Sleeping Dogs, I believe, went on to sell 2 million copies and made a profit.
Yeah.
Tomb Raider sold over 3 million, went on to make a profit. I believe Hitman Absolution also made a profit. Yeah, I forget what else was on that list. There are a couple of other. I believe also Deus Ex. No, not Deus Ex Human Revolution or Mankind Divided. Maybe Thief? I'd have to look up.
That one was a genuine flop.
I mean, Thief sucked.
Yeah.
Thief sucked ass. But I don't know. Maybe it sold well. What do I know?
But well, I guess what I'm looping back around is a lot of these projections I think are based on consoles being sold like they were in 2008, and now I think that we've got some data that says actually they aren't. I think that kind of maybe even shifts a lot more, because all of a sudden I think these projections start to go down when we see that consoles aren't being sold at a rate they were, which, even though game prices are going up, the production costs are tripling, so I don't know. I don't have a good answer, but it doesn't feel to me like, things are getting better rather than getting worse in some ways.
Yeah. I mean, at the end of the day, a lot of this depends on how fast it's getting worse. Like, it's not getting worse very quickly. It's
Right.
like we've plateaued and it's kind of slightly declining, from what I understand, based on the data. So, like, I mean, and there was that bump from the pandemic. Don't
Right.
get me wrong.
Yeah.
So, like, maybe it's not declining so much that we need to start, like, putting throwing cargo overboard and jumping in lifeboats. But I think we are at the point where we do have to start thinking about, well, what are the other revenue streams for these games? Should we be accelerating PC ports for things that would otherwise have been console exclusives? Should we be thinking of ways we can port these to high-end tablets? Should we adopt more of like a production committee model like they do for anime, and like at the same time we make the game, we also make the tie-in comic and the toys and all the other merchandise, and then everyone takes their piece of the pie. Like, what kind of financing model is going to make sense in order for us to continue being able to make these kinds of titles? And like, to be fair, we don't know what Square Enix thinks about FF7 Rebirth sales yet. They might come out and say, you know what, yeah, this was satisfying, we made a profit. Maybe it wasn't as big a profit as we made on 7 Remake, but it was a healthy profit, and it's enough to like sustain the Final Fantasy brand. You know what? That's a fantastic situation. I think we should all be happy with that. But if Square Enix comes out and says this missed projections is looking dire, then they should probably start thinking about other ways they can goose revenue. Other non-NFT related ways, because
Yeah,
we all remember what
they're going
Square
right back
Enix's
to that well.
CEO wanted to do, right? Which is like go invest in the blockchain and in AI. And their AI experiments so far have not yielded much fruit.
Yeah.
They were responsible for the Portopia serial murder case re-release, which is one of those old text-based kind of adventure games. Like, it has images, but it's one of those old adventure games with a text parser where you put in instructions and then the game will you'll say, hey, look at this object, or take this, eat this, touch this, right? So that had an old school text parser in there, and they're like, let's replace that with AI.
Yeah. People hated it.
Yeah, that didn't go so well. So.
I don't know. I mean, I didn't follow the Final Fantasy release as much as I should, because I said there's no way. I know me, how I'm going to play. I don't want to play this thing till it's done, you know? So I didn't really keep up with it like I think a lot of other people did. But I heard, you know, the first one had a pretty solid release, I felt like. And then, you know, there was some complaints here and there, and they're doing some weird stuff, but it sounds cool. Maybe they pull it off. And then it just kind of feels like people kind of stopped caring about it a little bit, you know?
I mean, Rebirth was really well received. Like, it did fantastically critically. And, like, I could open my YouTube Recs right now, and it's going to be, like, 30% clips from Final Fantasy VII Rebirth. Just because that's what all the gamers are talking about. So, like, there's enthusiasm for this. It's just pretty concentrated enthusiasm.
Yeah.
And I guess all the casual fans just kind of, like, sloughed off. Which is unfortunate.
I would be.
Sorry, go ahead.
I would be interested in it if I guess if it went the way where I thought it was going to do, which was, okay, well, we're going to get, you know, a version, we're going to get another version, but it's going to come flying out the gates. It has been incredibly slow from the first to the second, you know, and
yeah,
I think that's always got to have little weird, you know, consequences, I guess. And I think in this case, the main consequence being you lost a little bit of interest in the game world, I guess, because that's the only way I can explain that level of drop off is pretty astounding, honestly, to hear that it sold only half as much as the game that came before it. I think is, you know, pretty wild.
Yeah. And like I'm in the same boat as you. I'm gonna wait for this whole trilogy to be out when I'm like in my 40s.
Yeah.
And then I'll buy it all for like the PS8.
Yeah, and it'll be like it'll all
pay 150. Inflation will kill us. I'll probably pay like 300 Canadian in the trilogy. But yeah, that is what's going on with industry data. Some alarming things to potentially worry about. It's hard to know at this stage. So we're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, we're going to talk about what we've been playing lately. Stay tuned. welcome back to the Avocado Games Cast, episode 101, which is one more than 100, which we did last time, so you should go listen to our 100th episode extravaganza, and then come back and listen to the rest of this episode. We are going to talk about what we've been playing lately, and I'm going to kick us off by talking about a game that I recently finished called Children of the Sun. Cap, have you heard of this one?
I've heard it's a puzzle shooter. Like,
But
that's
yeah,
all
sorry.
I've seen about it was like yeah, I'm not even sure what it is, but no, I'm sure you'll tell me.
So it is a puzzle shooter where instead of playing as the shooter, you play as the bullet.
Okay.
Yeah. So imagine Sniper Elite crossed with Super Hot.
Okay.
That's what this game is like. So what the premise is that you are I guess a teenage girl who's escaped from a cult, and you have a sniper rifle, but that sniper rifle only has one bullet.
Mm-hmm.
Thankfully, you also have telekinetic powers.
Okay.
So when the bullet
Pretty fortunate.
hits a target, that target might be a cult leader, that target might be a bird or a dog, that target might be an exploding barrel or a gas tank. That allows you to re-aim the bullet in whatever direction you please. So what you have to do is chain together shots in order to eliminate all the cultists in one level with a single bullet.
You know what this kind of reminds me of is in Guardians of the Galaxy, the guy who can whistle and make his arrow do all kinds of things.
Is it
Yondu? Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like Yondu Simulator instead of Yondir.
A little bit, yeah. And the aesthetic is like this. Imagine if Suda51 read a lot of Southern Gothic novels.
Okay.
That's what this would be. It's like Killer is Dead, but like Southern fried and like in these dilapidated, like Alabama rural areas. Like that's what the aesthetic is. It's so neat.
That sounds really cool.
Yeah, like these puzzles are really, really intricate, and they like make you kind of think through your planning. It's the kind of game like instead of like, you know, some puzzle games have like one solution. You just kind of like figure out the solution, work your way backwards from what the solution should be to get the sequence of actions to reach it. This is a very different kind of game. It encourages a lot of experimentation. Like you're going to be trying every level like a dozen times, especially the later levels, to like figure out how you can take everybody out, accounting for like guard routines and like birds flying overhead, or things that kind of change in the level over as it progresses. You'll find that you'll shoot one guy and you might not have as great an angle as you thought to shoot the next guy, stuff like that. So it's a game where you're like really expected to experiment and tinker to reach a solution, rather than like sitting there like just cogitating until you come up with the answer. So I really enjoy it. I think this is a really fantastic puzzle game that everyone should check out.
The bullet control thing sounds really cool, actually. That sounds like in Sniper Elite, you don't ever really get that, but there's a lot of games where, you know, you launch like a missile and you get to like steer it into things. I've always really liked that.
Oh, yeah. And that actually unlocks later, where you can slightly affect the trajectory of a bullet mid-flight.
Mm-hmm.
And then you also unlock a couple of other abilities later that introduce some complications in terms of enemies that take multiple hits to kill, and then certain enemies that have like bullet deflection powers because they have weird psychic powers. It goes places. It gets really weird really fast.
That's awesome.
I'm definitely recommending this one to everyone who wants to play something a little bit off kilter, a little gory, but like is a really good brain teaser. Oh, plus the other thing I should mention, the sound design is fantastic. It's really crunchy. The music and the sound effects are really, really discordant, like really, really harsh to go with like the dissonant and clashing and kind of unsettling vibes of the whole thing. Really, really tremendous game.
Okay. I mean, when you said super hot, that you kind of had me there. It's weird that that game hasn't had more kind of spiritual or anything successors, honestly. Super hot, but that sounds really really cool.
Yeah, I wish that there were more games kind of in the genre, and I wish this game were a little longer, because I would still like to play more of these levels. Um, Maybe they'll do like a Steam Workshop thing, and people will
Oh,
be
that would
able
be
to
awesome.
make their
Yeah,
own
make
levels.
your own. That,
I
that
really hope they would do that for Neon White, and they never did. So
that's such a cool possibility though for so many puzzle games now, where it's like, okay, it's got to be like mentally like at some point you're like, okay, we've done all the puzzles we can, and then you release it to the community. They're like, nah, look at all these. I bet you that feels kind of cool to see. People take on a game like that if you're making puzzle games.
yeah, and they do get to see, because like this is a puzzle game with a score, like based on the shots you pull off and how efficient you are at killing everyone. You get a
Hmm.
higher score in the level, and there are leaderboards, and you even get to like at the end of the level, it shows you the pattern your bullet took through the level, and like you can save it as like a screenshot wallpaper. It creates these like really interesting star patterns on the level that
I was
are
thinking like
really neat to look at.
Family Circus, and the little kids like dotted line. It's just like all the places he went. That's what I was thinking. I don't know. You go to the CSE, you should know what I'm talking about. But
Yeah, yeah. I'm thinking. I know what you're talking about. Like, you draw on a map. It's like that,
yeah,
but bloodier and deadlier.
it said it's just
Really neat stuff.
full of like like murder on the way over. Yeah,
I mean, that kid's a little shit. He's
yeah.
probably killed a few people. The other game that I've been playing one more game, but we'll get to that in a little bit. But the other game I wanted to talk about is Princess Peach Showtime, which I haven't completed yet. And the best way to talk about this is Nintendo has had like a lot of partnerships with external studios. Nintendo's often seen as very insular and very secretive, but they actually work a lot with external studios. Like, they don't do any of the Kirby games in house; those are all done by HAL Laboratory. They didn't do Metroid Dread in house; that was done by a Spanish studio, Mercury Steam. They don't do any of the Fire Emblem games in house; those are all done by Intelligent Systems. And generally, those partnerships are looked upon favorably by the gaming audience, right?
Yeah.
Like, especially Kirby and the Forgotten Land a few years ago. That game was incredible. People really liked Metroid Dread. I've never been a Fire Emblem guy, but people seem to like those games. Even Pikmin 4 last year was developed mostly by a studio called Aiding. And a little bit from internally at Nintendo, but it was mostly done by Aiding, and that game was incredible. So, sometimes when Nintendo goes and gives their IP to other people, or even think of something like Mario Rabbids, which was done by Ubisoft. That game turned out fantastic. So sometimes these partnerships can really yield fruit. And then sometimes you get partnerships like the one that Nintendo has with Camelot. People don't like the recent Nintendo sports titles. I happen to like Mario Tennis Aces, but most people don't. And people didn't like Strikers. People didn't like Mario Golf Super Rush. So, these don't all work for the best always. Uh, Another partnership Nintendo has is with a studio called Goodfeel, and that's the studio that developed Princess Peach Showtime. And this is a case where it really feels like Nintendo should have handled this internally, because this game fails in ways that make it feel very, very non-Nintendo. So just to explain what this game is, it's an action adventure game, technically 3D, but you mostly just look head on at the scenery. So it's really kind of a 2D platformer, sometimes kind of 3D ish. The conceit is that, why is it effectively 2D? The conceit is that everything is like in a series of plays at a theater. And the theater got taken over by an evil witch named Grape.
Okay.
Yeah. Peach's evil
Yeah, yeah.
counterpart isn't
Great.
Plum, it's
Yeah.
Grape. And what Peach does is she goes and quote unquote performs in the plays by donning different costumes. So she might don the costume of a sword fighter and get like sword fighting abilities, or don the costume of a ninja and get like ninja fighting abilities and things like that. So every time you put on a different costume, the game mechanically becomes very different. And Nintendo's already shown that they can do this
Yeah,
with Super
Mario.
Mario Odyssey,
Yeah,
which turned out really well. And External Studios have already shown they can do this with Kirby and the Forgotten Land, and everyone's favorite horrifying
yeah.
power set, the Mouthful mode. Which is, Mouthful mode is amazing, by the way. I absolutely love it, but I understand why people are freaked out by it, because it is really freaky.
It is really weird. Yeah, especially when you eat something like way too big. You're like, ooh, that looks really weird. Like the car.
Yeah, like, the Carby is amazing, and I totally understand why it like gives people a sick feeling in their stomach.
It's like, that's too much, too full.
Yeah, but they've done well with this, right?
Yeah.
You can completely change the mechanics of the game, and it still feels good to play. And you intuitively understand what you're supposed to do when you get those new mechanics, or the game explains it to you in a pretty intuitive and quick way. Princess Peach Showtime does not do that. It does not feel like a game with Nintendo polish. I don't mean in a visual sense. Visually, this game is really polished. The animation work is incredible. And people tell me that the game has frame rate issues, but I haven't experienced them, so I have no idea what they're talking about. This game, though, it lacks gameplay polish. Like, the typical Nintendo gameplay curve is introduce mechanic, then introduce mechanic with danger,
Right.
and then combine mechanics with other mechanics. And then you learn how to use the mechanics through gameplay in a really intuitive way. This game does not do that. Like, the gameplay curve is right away, you are going to be using these powers in complicated ways. Or right away, you're going to have to use this power kind of in an undocumented way. Like, to beat one boss, you need to activate like a kind of, how some games like Bayonetta especially get like that witch time dodge when you dodge at the last second.
Yeah.
You need that to beat one of the bosses, and the game just does not explain this to you at all. And maybe that's fine for a game intended for adults,
Right.
but this is a family game,
Yeah.
which presumably like 8-year-olds are going to be playing, and I do not know how you can hand this game to an 8-year-old and they'll be able to figure out what to do.
Yeah, and especially if it feels cheap. Like it feels like they sprung it on you instead of something that they taught you how to do. That's a really, really rough spot to put, anybody who's learning a game into.
Yeah, it's not even like a hard game. It's just a game that has no consistent visual language, or like ludic language. Like, the gameplay language is just constantly shifting in ways that are unintuitive and unexplained. Sometimes just unclear what you have to do. It's really, really easy to miss collectibles. And the problem is you have to redo a level to catch stuff you've
I
missed.
hate that. I hate it.
You have to redo the entire level. Oh, and sometimes, like, let's say there's a challenge where you have to, like, get by, say, a mini boss. And if you beat the mini boss without damage, you get one of the stars. If you beat the mini boss, you get a star. You beat the mini boss without damage, you get an additional star. But you don't know that that's a condition on that mini boss. So you beat the mini boss, and then what you see is you get one star, and then a red X next to the position for the other star, telling you that. So you failed somehow, but you don't know exactly how you failed.
Yeah.
And like, imagine handing that to an 8-year-old girl, and like she plays that game and she gets that red X, and she's like, "Mom, Dad, this game gave me a red X. It fucking sucks." And then you'd be like, "Watch your language, young miss." But yes, I agree, it fucking sucks.
Yeah. No,
like,
I really have a hard time with a game that pushes you to replay it by cheap shit like that, because that's really all that is, right? Well, now
is
that
cheap
you
shit.
know this
Absolutely.
is a victory, condition, or a bonus condition, now you're gonna immediately replay that level, right? Because you were like, oh, well, I didn't know that if I, use a bomb on this guy, it's actually the bad way to do it. So now I'm gonna defeat it without doing that, but that feels incredibly cheap to do.
Like, the worst part about it is, let's say there are two forks in the road, and you don't know which one will advance the level and which one will unlock the secret. If you pick wrong and pick the one that advances the level, you know that you've cut off a secret that you could see previously.
That would drive me nuts. Absolutely.
It drives me nuts. Like, that's the thing I hate most about this game is, like, I know both forks are there. I haven't missed the secret. I know it's there. I fully intended to go get it. But because I picked the wrong fork and picked the one that progresses the level, now I can't go back and pick up the secret.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
you know, one of my most hated games of all time was, I get it wrong, but is it Dead Rising, the one where you're in the mall and you have like,
yeah, that is Dead Rising.
yeah, so you have to do things in a certain order, but you know, like I can't do this during this playthrough, so because of that, I just basically have to, you know, burn a playthrough to do this thing that I can't do this one. Um, One of the most frustrating mechanics ever. Hate it. I don't know why people think it's a cool mechanic, but really all it does is just bloat playtime, right? Like makes you play through the game in other ways over and over again. And I think that's a really, like, even just being cynical, like that's not fun, and you know it's not fun. You're just trying to get me to play more of your game, right? Um, Terrible mechanic. I hate it. I know exactly what you're talking about, and it is beyond frustrating.
Yeah, and like the typical Nintendo approach would be like encouraging you to go back for secrets,
Right,
right?
right.
Like, or like you'll beat a level and then more stuff will open up in the level. Like they do this in Super Mario Odyssey, like Super Mario 64. Like all this encourages you to go back and explore. And this game punishes you and says, all right, chump, get back in there and get what you were too stupid to find the
Yeah,
first time.
yeah, that you didn't even know you were looking for. You know,
Yeah,
that's
it's just,
awful, awful, awful,
it's
awful.
like, I cannot imagine that children were involved in the playtests of this. Because I think if I were a child playtesting this, I would have thrown my Joy Cons at whoever was supervising the playtest. It's not really an acceptable way to structure a game, and it's a shame because this game at its core is such a cool idea. I love the idea of Princess Peach in a play having all these
Yeah.
various powers and like going through these levels and kicking ass and beating the bad guys. Like that's awesome. And it's cool that they've made a game that is like, intended for a female audience that is cool and badass. I totally get that. And I really want it to be good. And it really lets down what I think is a fantastic idea. And
Man, that is
yeah,
a really unfortunate.
that's a real
Yeah,
disappointment. Like, you know, little girl gamers should have good games too.
yeah.
They shouldn't just get like,
What?
free to play Barbie dress up garbage. Like they should have like real cool games that are like intended for them. Like, okay, I don't want to like disparage dress up games. Like dress up games that are well made and like have a good like non abusive commercial model. Totally 100% on board with those. But yeah, I was just hoping that this would be a game that you could show to like my cousin's children one day and they'd be into it.
But gives you like a full experience of a game. I mean, I think that's important. I don't think you should, you know, counteract, a fun game with bloated playtime. I just, it's unnecessary. It's something that
It's
games that,
bloat and confusion.
yeah,
Yeah,
like
both.
you do that if you're like not sure if your game's good. That's like the stink of desperation all over it, kind of. You know.
It does like have that bit of desperation, right? Like if we don't provide challenge, like almost as if they thought if we don't provide challenge, then it'll feel like we're condescending to girl gamers, and like that's not really the issue. Like this is a game for children, and I think children of all genders can go ahead and play this game. But like it is also a game that children will play, and you need to make it intuitive for children. Like it can't just be like you give it to your child and they play it for 10 minutes and they're like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do, hand it back to mom and dad.
Right.
Like that just can't be how, like that's not a game for kids. That is a game for adults to do for their kids. It's like when when they give like an assignment at school that children clearly can't complete
Yeah.
and the parents did it. They're like, make a paper mache computer, right? And then the parents made the paper mache computer, and the one kid whose parents didn't help them, that thing comes out looking like a wreck,
Yeah.
right? That's what this game is. It's the paper mache computer for child
That's
gamers.
something similar going on with a game that I kind of dabble with. I haven't really gotten too far enough. Don't really want to get too into it yet. But Age of Sigmar Realms of Ruin, right? Kind of a similar thing, but each mission gives you experience if you do like the three things in each stage to unlock it. One of them is almost always finish the mission quickly. And if I can tell RTS developers anything, cut that shit out. Like I like to play how I want to play. I don't like flying through missions, you know? It's a style of RTS play that like I just don't enjoy. And if you want me to experience your game, why are you rewarding me for finishing it quickly? Doesn't that feel kind of stupid, you know? Um, but anyway, but yeah, so like you finish the mission, it's like, oh, here's the three things you could have done to get like max experience, right? And like it does tell you in game, but you have to like pause it and go through some menus. But like then you finish the mission, it's like, oh, I had to, like not sacrifice any of my guys to this pit when I was doing that because I didn't know that was a thing. So now, do I go back and replay it to get that, XP bonus, or just like, or am I just done with the mission basically? Um, so yeah, that kind of feels similar, and it really annoyed me about that game too. So sounds like that's maybe just something they do to engage you further into a game.
Yeah, like I'm fine with that to some extent, as long as it feels like a bonus that I missed out on,
Mhm.
rather than a punishment that like makes me feel stupid for missing.
Yeah,
And this feels like a punishment,
yeah,
which is especially bad in a game, like I said, intended for children. I understand you just finished Dragon's
yeah.
Dogma
Well,
2.
I finished it twice.
Oh, you played it
if
through
if you
twice.
played
Oh,
it through
wow.
one time, you haven't played Dragon's Dogma 2. It's probably a little bit spoily here, but um, first time I was playing through, I was like, why does the title card say Dragon's Dogma? Right? I didn't pick up that this was like some kind of like, narrative aspect of it, right? And I've heard, hey, Dragon's Dogma 2 is the game we always intended Dragon's Dogma 1 to be, right? Um, and so when I'm getting this, I don't know what you call it, like the title screen that's basically, Dragon's Dogma 1, I thought it was kind of a little cutesy thing to it, right? No, you beat the game and there's a true ending, and then you go to another world that's like the world of ruin, and you get a whole nother game there, basically, and then you got to go back to the real world again and fix it. Um, so they do the true ending thing, which I love. I've loved it ever since Final Fantasy VI. It's one of my favorite little twisteroos that they'll give you in an RPG, and this one has it in in the coolest way I think I can imagine. The whole game feels like you're playing a new game in the after it. You've got access to different abilities and different characters and different items and stuff, and it's just a really cool thing to do. So all that to say is the game, my first playthrough felt short. I was like, it's kind of a short game, and I actually kind of like ended the game and was like, wow, that was it. And then little did I
And then,
know,
like, does it like actually roll
yeah,
credits?
and then
Oh,
it gives you
wow.
New Game Plus, but you don't get New Game Plus True Ending. So I had to figure out what the hell was going on, because there was, just through chatter on the internet, I was like, I didn't see any of that shit. I don't know if they're talking about there, right? But yeah, there's a true ending you have to get in order to unlock basically like the real New Game Plus. And then when you play the real New Game Plus, um, you're kind of playing like, the actual, you're actually, the title screen switches to Dragon's Dogma 2, which I thought was really cool, right? So they're kind of messing with you, but this game got a lot of crap, and I'm going to say, deservedly, because I don't know that anybody's ever going to stand up for DLC, but the DLC is so inconsequential and unneeded. It's almost a joke.
Is
Um,
this like when Deus Ex Mankind Divided, when they completely balanced the game and then Square Enix like add
that,
microtransactions, so then they sold practice kits completely unnecessarily?
that's exactly how I would describe it. Like that level of like, okay, there's like 1,500 of these things in the game that I can buy with gold if I play for an hour or two. But if I just want to have it right now, I can buy it for $1.99. It's like they don't. Hopefully, they never figure it out. But it's like they do not understand monetization at all, and it feels really weird in the game because it's like, wait, they want me to pay real money for that thing? Like a fairy stone, f like fairy Ferry is what takes you from like location to location in the game world, right? Um,
Yeah.
and you can buy them for, I think it's like 25,000 gold. To give you an idea, like the average goblin that I was killing was dropping something like 100 gold maybe. So like this is not hard to farm that level of gold to get, right? It is extremely doable. And then
Yeah, just kill 25
yeah, and
goblins, right?
then I mean that's they're not even the hard thing, like the real. And then there's different ways to get them, different trade items and stuff like that. But it's very doable to get those. And then I think they're selling them for 99 cents, like instead of like an hour, not even an hour, maybe 15 minutes. It's saving you maybe 15 minutes of goblin killing to spend a buck, which, I mean, yeah, that's shitty to do, but it's also stupid to buy. So it's like, like a stupidity tag. Like, okay, well, like I'm not going to waste my 15 minutes. Here's a dollar. I'm too rich. Um, but yeah, really, really weird that they even sold some of this stuff to me, much less, that people were buying it. So I kind of just walked away from it just being like, okay, well, I mean, if people are buying it, I guess it's there's a reason they're selling it. But man, I do not at all see the reason. I mean, it felt like almost silly to buy. Combat in the game is great. It's to me, it felt a lot like Monster Hunter kind of, more than anything.
But
Go ahead.
this time, instead of attacking the butt, you're attacking from the
Yeah, yeah,
front.
you're getting occasionally to punch a face or something instead of just honing in on the butts, um, which I think it's hilarious. But like it's so obvious to me in that game where you're like, okay, I got to go punch butts for an hour. You know what I mean? Like this one
Yeah.
does something kind of similar. But yeah, it's the game itself is really brilliant when it comes to how to make it feel like you're doing something cool. Um, Overall though, I don't think that the game left me feeling um like they left a lot of meat on the bone. They really get you through their RPG levels fast and quick. Enjoying the combat, enjoying the builds. The pawn system is still great. It's kind of like pseudo multiplayer, but not really. I played through the whole thing with one of my buddies' pawns, helping me out. Um, I don't like how they did the Holy Trinity of healer, fighter, damage dealer. Really, um, felt kind of forced. Like you almost have to have a mage the entire time because they're the only ones that can really heal, unless you're going to go crazy using potions, and who wants to do that, right? So it kind of felt like a mage was a mandatory second player on your team of four. So I wasn't a fan of that,
Oh,
but
it's a shame.
yeah. But so what you do is you just like everybody basically uses their pawn as a mage, and then you get higher cool fun ones for everything else. But fun game overall. The DLC drama I think was a little overblown, to be honest, and I don't think that. I think because of that, like the initial every game's got that like one like okay, this is the new hotness. What are we gonna say about it? And I think that DLC stuff sucked so much wind out of it, that I think that probably when they talk about how this game actually did, I think it's going to be a little disappointing. But I really enjoyed my time with it. It's one where I hope it gets a DLC on the level of Dark Arisen, where it feels like a really comprehensive DLC. But yeah, I really enjoyed my time with it.
Yeah, I'm glad you did because I've been hearing lots of good and intriguing things about this game, to the point where I was considering picking it up, and unfortunately, I just don't have time for it at the moment. But it seems very, very different from a lot of the other games I typically play. A lot more player hostile, but in a good way, not like in a Soulsy way.
Yeah, that's it steers, man. 'Cause I'm not a huge fan of Souls, right? It steers so
I'm even less of a fan than you.
it steers clear of the Souls entire design to me, in a great way, because I never feel like I was frustrated. I always felt like, well, if I use this ability or went to this place, I didn't have to memorize the bosses. It just always felt like very unique to me. And I liked it a lot because of that, because I don't know that I would have enjoyed it has had it stayed as straightforward as a lot of those other Souls games do, where it's like, okay, this learn this pattern, and if you don't learn the pattern, you're gonna hate this. I never felt like I was stuck, which is good. That's a good feeling for a game to feel like the combat feels natural and you're learning it, but you don't feel stuck.
Yeah, I feel like the distinction is in Souls likes you're learning encounters,
Yeah,
and in a game like Dragon's Dogma, you're actually learning the mechanics and
yeah,
how they work with each other. And that's a feeling that I would love to have. I don't mind playing difficult games.
Right. Right.
Like I have this reputation as a Souls hater for being someone who hates difficult games, and like no, there are games that are too hard for me that I actually really like. Like I gave up on Pato Box because I was not good enough at video games to finish that game, but that game is amazing, well, at least from what I played of it. So I want to be able to play difficult games, but I want to feel like I'm learning how to play the game
Yeah.
rather than how to beat a specific boss and then throwing all that knowledge out the window the next encounter I find.
Yeah.
I'm sure there are going to be some listeners who are going to be like, that's actually not how Souls Likes works. You're supposed to use the knowledge from one boss to apply to the next. I'm like, that's not how Sekiro worked. That game did not work like that. That game is you learn the cheese strat for every boss, and then none of that knowledge applies to the next encounter. I'm sorry, that is how that game is constructed, and it's garbage. But like I'm really intrigued to play a game where I feel like I'm actually getting better at it, not just because I'm progressing in terms of skill, but my knowledge and understanding and reflexes are being tuned to like the mechanics and learning them really precisely and in great depth.
Yeah, I'd be really interested to see what you think of this one because I think it's going to hit all of those little, those things for you in a good way. I think that you're going to enjoy the time you spend with it, where it never felt annoying. It felt more like I was getting better with the game. Yeah, if you ever do pick it up, I want to see what you think about it.
Absolutely. I'll see what I can do. I might have some time later this summer, but I also made the good decision or mistake, depending on who you are, of buying Immortals of Avium when it was on sale.
Oh, okay. You're the guy who did it.
So I'm the one guy who bought a copy. So thank you. Or sorry, you're welcome, Ascendant Studios. So I will probably be playing that this summer, and if I finish it super quick, then I probably will have time to play Dragon's Dogma 2. But if I take my time with it, then unfortunately I'm going to have to let that game fall by the wayside. It happens.
Yeah.
You can't play everything.
Yeah, I mean, it
There are
really
too
does.
many video games.
And then
Too many good video games.
when you pick and choose, I mean, sometimes it's like the most arbitrary of things sometimes, but it's like, yeah, I just don't have time for this right now. And I've definitely done that with better games, where I'm just like, all right, I just don't have time for this. So, but it would be one
Yeah.
where like, I feel like it would trying to figure out from people who also don't really enjoy soul stuff is really tough because it feels like you're talking to like, like you're in the Middle Ages saying bad things about the church, Like, so you have to be like, hey, are you do you hate Souls games as well? Yeah, me too. Okay, so I do sometimes feel like but trying to find out what it is that games that are that style can do right is always interesting to me. When other people are like, yeah, I like it because of this. When sometimes it's hard to put your finger on what you like or don't like about Souls games.
Yeah, and like with Souls games especially, these are games that really, really don't meet with my sensibilities. But like I understand if that meets those people's sensibilities, I totally understand people enjoying those games. It's just that I wish I could get a game that gives me some of those mechanical feelings, but is more geared towards actually learning the mechanics, and is more geared towards like a little bit more polished in some regards, and has a actual functioning camera.
Mm-hmm.
That's the kind of game that I would like to
The
play.
camera, oh man, it is. It feels like you're fighting it sometimes.
I still don't know how FromSoft gets away with having non-functioning 3D camera.
It's weird,
after
right?
having made so many of these games, from Demon Souls to Elden Ring, they still don't know how to make a functioning camera, and it's absurd. But enough dumping on From Software. Speaking of another game that I've been playing that From Software made, Armored Core. Speaking of another game with core in the title, I've been playing ReCore. That was a really tortured segue. I apologize for that. So ReCore came out back in 2016. This was an open zone action adventure quasi Metroidvania kind of game. So in this game, you play as a young woman named Jewel, who is part of a team sent to help terraform a desert planet. Um, it's really, a really weird game. It's not even a game of its time. It's a game like 8 years past its
Yeah.
time.
Yeah.
Like it feels like a game that would have come out at around like 2010, maybe 2009. So the mix of gameplay is third person shooter and 3D platformer. And some of the platform mechanics are really neat. There's one where one of your little robot companions, who is like a spider bot, will grab you and run you along rails, and then will fling you off at the end of the rail. That's it's just fun to do every single time. And that third person shooting involves you have four different colors of weapon, and then matching the color of your weapon to the color of the enemy does bonus damage, and different colors have slightly different effects. So switching between those on the fly makes part of that gameplay loop. And this is all pretty fun.
Yeah.
Like this all works pretty well. Sorry, go
I
ahead.
remember when I played it. Was this a Xbox Series launch title?
I believe it was an Xbox One exclusive.
Okay.
So this was 2016. This would have been before the series launch. Series launch was 2020,
I'm trying to
correct?
remember when I played it. I remember it being some type of either exclusive or launch or something.
Yeah, it was Xbox One exclusive. That much I know, and it was also ported to Windows.
Okay.
So I'm playing it on my PC. So yeah, it is an Xbox game. It was developed, I believe, by Concept, who did Mighty Number Nine and Armature. This is a lot better than what I've heard Mighty Number Nine is, by the way. So like, don't go thinking that this is going to make you feel like an anime fan on prom night. It's a decent game, but it also has a lot of issues. Like, it's not a very good looking game, and I don't mean in the sense that it has, like old graphics. I mean that in the sense that it's really aesthetically monotonous. The whole thing is set in a desert, and there's very little variation in that desert. So you're just looking at the same
Yeah.
stuff the entire time you're playing it. Combat, for how fun it is in principle and how fun it can be, is also extremely frustrating. Because your ability to make it through a challenge has almost nothing to do with your level. It basically depends on whether or not you get stun locked.
Hmm.
Like if you get stun locked and then hit by three different enemies, you're dead.
There's a lot of
And
times you die even being stun locked because like the game doesn't register something. Because I remember you have like some abilities that'll get you out of certain scenarios, but the game just never really seems to like know what is what or when certain things hit. I guess.
yeah, it does feel like I'm kind of fighting the game at times,
Mhm.
and like sometimes mashing to get like sometimes you have to mash spacebar to get out of a negative status effect. And sometimes it feels like it works, and sometimes it feels like it doesn't. And it might be because the effect's piling up from getting hit by an enemy, and that would be the stun locking,
Right.
right? Like the effect piles up, then the effect comes back as soon as you escape, and it just feels like sometimes you have no control over the flow of a fight, and it's just up to random chance whether or not you make it through. I don't really feel like I'm getting more skilled at the combat, or that I have more options to deploy, or that like I have special powers that I could use to turn the tide. I really feel like it's a matter of I got lucky dodging at the right time, and this attack missed me, and therefore I didn't get stun locked. But yeah, otherwise I'm really enjoying the platforming parts of this. I think they're probably the most. It's some of the most fun I've had doing 3D platforming outside of a Nintendo game, and it especially works pretty well on these like desolate ruins of like ships and scientific facilities, and the way these different parts of the facilities kind of jut out and make these platforms. They've got these really neat platforming challenges and sequences and set pieces that I think can be pretty creative and a lot of fun to play.
Yeah, I liked my time with it. It felt a little, like it wasn't quite there for me. not in a bad way, but like a launch title. I think that's why my number one remember of it was like, okay, this is a launch title. It's not quite there, but I do remember thinking like, okay, this is showing that.
Yeah.
Um,
Well, it came out in 2016, so it wasn't a launch title, but it feels
oh,
like a launch
and
title.
yeah, then I was probably wrong about it being a launch title. It was being an
Yeah.
exclusive, I know for sure, but
Yeah, it wasn't exclusive, but I totally get what you mean. It feels like a launch
right.
title. It has all the problems with like lack of polish and like weird mechanics that you get sometimes with launch titles, where it doesn't feel like they fully mastered the console they're on.
Yeah.
And like I totally get why it feels like an Xbox One launch title for sure.
Remember Cameo, the game Cameo, the
Is that with a
K?
cake?
Yeah, that
I do not remember it,
but
but I
that
know
was
it
that was
exists.
a launch title, and that one left me feeling kind of in a lot of similar ways as ReCore did, where it was like, okay, we're just trying to like get something off the ground, see if we can learn the tools, stuff like that. Because I don't know how often especially like the Japanese devs, I don't know how much time they get to spend with some of these things, like learning the tools and stuff. So that's what it felt like to me. Was like, okay, these guys are learning this, how to make this game, because it felt like not bad, but it didn't feel like it was complete when I played it. Like there was more to the game, but it never kind of materialized.
Yeah, I totally do get that with ReCore, which was like a joint. It's a joint American Japanese
Oh,
production
really?
actually. Yeah, and guess who the writer was for ReCore?
Ooh. Um, I don't know. You're gonna. I don't even.
You've definitely heard of this
I feel
person.
like I can't remember any of the writing other than the dad leaving. So I don't know if that's good or not. The dad like leaves you and you got to like find out where everything is. That's really all I remember. So no, it did not leave that much of a impact on me, to be honest with you.
The writer of the game was Joseph Staten.
Really? From Halo?
Yep, Joseph Staten of Halo fame was the writer for ReCore.
Maybe he had some free time. I don't know. That
Yeah, like when I found that out, I was floored. I
yeah.
was like, "Holy crap! They got Joe Staten to write this game." Like it's not badly
No,
written.
it's
It's
just not
just
memorable.
like
Yeah.
it's not memorable in the slightest. It's very like the writing is almost very perfunctory.
Yeah.
Like it's just there to advance you moving through that world. Um, but yeah, it is also done in Unity of all engines. Weirdly enough.
To show off the bright deserts. I don't know. Like that's a weird one. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a Unity developed game written by Joseph Staten that was a joint Japanese American production and was an Xbox One exclusive.
I, the,
How many of
yeah.
those are there?
The Japanese part you really do feel though. It feels like it's like like it's got like kind of a loop of like get this thing, upgrade, go to this area, upgrade, open the new door, go through here. There's a new thing to learn. Very Nintendo based kind of feeling to it, but it wasn't bad. It's just I don't remember it being memorable at all.
Yeah, the only reason it's memorable for me is because I'm in the midst of
Yeah,
playing it. But like you talk to me at this time next year, I'll be like, oh yeah, I beat that
yeah,
last year.
yeah,
I don't remember a thing about it. The only thing that like really sticks with me is the character design is very like this game came out in 2016, but I swear the character design is straight out of like 2004.
yeah, yeah,
Like the Jewel, despite working on a desert planet in like the wilderness and ruins, has like perfect eye makeup and like pencil thin eyebrows. It's the funniest thing on the planet.
yeah. I remember her being like very like girly, in like her design, and then you know,
Just like very like neutral in
yeah,
her behavior and demeanor.
yes,
It's
exactly.
very
Like
funny.
passive. Like she's very passive. And it's weird because like the whole game is about like losing her dad. I'm gonna go get my dad back, but she's kind of like it's like about 2/3 through the game. It's basically like, okay, well, do you remember your dad? Like, do you remember the mission we're on? It kind of feels like it's very perfunctory at that point. Like you don't spend a lot of time, like actually doing anything with any of the stuff that the game had told you was important at the time.
Yeah, it does feel like a little assembled from disparate
Hmm.
parts. And it all kind of works together in the end, but it doesn't feel like a fully coherent experience. And that might be because three different studios worked on it. It
Yeah.
wasn't just arbitrary concept. Also, the French studio Asobo assisted.
A lot of languages going on
Yeah,
in that game game design meeting.
yeah. Like I don't know how that. Like there must have been multiple translators getting paid a lot of money to make this game work. But yeah,
Not a
that's
bad game. It's
ReCore.
it's just interesting to come back around to it. It's I think that those are the games that either kind of like hit or miss, or just kind of sit in that middle area. For every Jack and Daxter, there's one of these. But I remember enjoying it roughly for my time. It just felt like kind of like, okay, that was an experience. Moving on.
Yeah, I'm pretty sure you and Joe Staten had the same
Yeah.
reaction.
He's like, all right, back to Halo.
Yeah, it's Bungie time, folks. All right, I think that's all we wanted to discuss in terms of what we've been playing.
Yeah.
So let's call this episode to a close. If you'd like to keep up to date with the podcast, we have a website, avocadogamescast.wordpress.com. And on that website, we post each episode. We also post a link dump to fact check some of the stuff we talk about. And you can also subscribe to us on Apple Podcasts and Spotify. You can also subscribe to us on Google Podcasts until June 24th. I'll have to figure out how to move us over to YouTube Music at some point. So,
You're right. Like every time we start, like it feels like all these are falling apart around us. These all these services that you felt were going to be like around for a while. And that's Google for par for the course though. But yeah,
the Google graveyard has like more gravestones than what's a big cemetery, like the Woodlawn
yeah.
Cemetery in New York or like the Saint-Anne Notre Dame in Montreal. Like it has more gravestones than those huge ass cemeteries. I don't know what they're doing over
Nope.
there, man. Like
Not me either.
even things that feel like they should be profitable are just killed because I don't know of internal politics or
Not
some key
profitable
engineer
enough.
leaves.
It's like we were talking about earlier. Like someone said, "Hey, you should be making X amount of dollars on this," and someone's mad that they're not. And that's what you end up with.
Or it doesn't fit with like business direction. Like we're all pivoting to AI now, and there's not enough AI in Google Podcasts, so I guess we're not doing it anymore. Like I don't know why they keep doing
Yeah,
this.
I have no clue. I have no clue.
Yeah.
It's like they thought like the glasses were going to be the big thing, and then like it just always seems like that.
Oh, I had a classmate in grad school who wore Google
Oh,
Glass.
really?
Like he got the prototype and he was running around with it, and he looked like the biggest douchebag on the planet when he was wearing them. Or just like, dude,
Yeah.
get literally anything else. Buy literally any other gadget. Make literally any other device your entire personality.
Now we're getting to do it all over again with the Apple ones, right?
Oh yeah, the Apple VR headset. That what's it called? Apple.
Oh, I cannot remember.
I don't know. Like I've heard it's impressive tech, but I also don't want to wear a headset 24/7.
Yeah.
I like kind of having my head free, and I will make concessions. Like I'll wear a mask if I'm sick. Don't get me wrong, but other than that, I want my head free.
Yeah, there was like a
You
video
know?
going around of like a guy on his wedding. He's like at his wedding wearing one of those, and I was like, oh, his wife must be so mad about that. That's so disrespectful, you know?
I mean, I figure if you're gonna marry the kind of person who would do that, you're kind of
Yeah, you
like
signed up for it
bringing
at
that upon
point.
yourself, right? Like you know what you're getting into at that point. And if you don't like just immediately turn around and walk back down the aisle once you see that going on, like I think you kind of know what's coming,
Yeah, I
right?
think so.
Hopefully they have a loving marriage, and even if they have it that loving marriage from behind the comfort of their Apple VR, who am I to judge? So yeah, I think that's all we want to talk about today. We will see you folks next time for more video game goodness and more dumping on Apple VR. So stay tuned, everyone, and take care.
Good night.